Hare Krishna. Most welcome this evening for a special program with His Holiness Krishna Kshetra Swami. Thank you so much for coming. Please, if you can come a little closer, there is still space and maybe some more devotees will join us. Yes, thank you. So we're very happy to have Maharaj with us. Of course, some of you have already participated in some programs, but still, just briefly, I'd like to introduce Maharaj. Maharaj is a direct disciple of Srila Prabhupada. He's a spiritual master in our tradition, and he's also a sannyasi and a traveling monk. And Maharaj also has a parallel identity. He's also a scholar. He has a PhD from the Oxford University.
It's called schizophrenia.
In a very good way. And Maharaj also serves at the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies. And he's also an author of several books, has written, yes, several, I should count them and tell you exact number next time. One of the latest books was Cow Care in Hindu Animal Ethics. Yes. And now Maharaj at the moment writes on a new book, which will be yoga and the animal ethics, and that's the topic for this evening. So I'm looking forward to hear from Maharaj. And yeah, thank you so much for being with us. Hare Krishna.
How are we with language translation needed?
Spricht jemand kein English?
Everyone's okay with it.
Everyone understands English. Wonderful.
Except those who are Russian speakers.
Do we have some Russian translation? Could you ask if someone needs?
Кто-то нуждается в переводе в русском языке.
Identify one.
Krishna Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Shri Shri Jagannath Subhadra Baladeva ki jai. Shri Shri Gaur Nitai ki jai. Hare Krishna. Thank you all for coming this evening. On a Thursday evening. Let's come to a Hare Krishna temple on a Thursday. What shall we do this evening? I know, let's go to Hare Krishna temple. Someone's going to talk about animals and yoga. Let's see what he has to say. Okay. Well, it's a work in progress. That's the first point to make. Oh. It's a work in progress, and maybe I start with a little explanation of the history of this project. And I'll start by, let's say, showing off the book that you mentioned. And before somebody asks, do you have any copies of this for sale? The answer is no. Because I can't carry around these books, but you can order it. And you can also download it in digital format, free of charge and legally. That's open access. It's an open access publication. Cow Care in Hindu Animal Ethics is a volume in the Palgrave Macmillan Animal Ethics book series, of which there are now something like 40 titles. So you can find this easily on the internet. You can either search the title of this book, which will take you right there, or you can search Palgrave Animal Ethics, and that will get you there also. So, it was mentioned that by Krishna Kshetra Swami, that I've been involved. Yes, I have a somewhat schizophrenic life. Trying to be a devotee and trying to also engage in the academic universe, or one little academic universe. We have a very interesting center, I would say, in Oxford, and this you might also like to look at on the internet. The Oxford Center for Hindu Studies was founded in 1999, actually 98. Well, maybe. I think it was 99 is the year that I came to Oxford, and it was just, I think, a year before that they had started up. Of course, the idea was there long. Shonaka Rishi Prabhu is the guiding light in this project. He's done amazing things and continues to do amazing things. It's an academic institute which has unofficial, at one time official, but now unofficial, close associations with Oxford University. And one could say so many things about that center, but you can also look that up. They have a very nice website. I've been involved with that center, as I said, since 1999. And after I finished my studies, I was allowed to continue there as what they call a research fellow. A fellow. And I have an ongoing project, a research project that I work on together with one other scholar devotee called the Bhagavata Purana Research Project. We have several other scholars involved. And there's a website for that as well, separate website. But a few years ago, I think something like 7 years ago, the director, the academic director of our center, Gavin Flood, received an invitation to give a talk at the Oxford Center for Animal Ethics about Hinduism and animal ethics. And the invitation that he got, he said, I don't really have time for this, and this is not really my subject area. So that invitation kind of got moved from one desk to another in our center, and it ended up on my desk, so to say, or in my email. And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. Let me do it. So I gave one presentation, that led to another and another. It led to a couple of publications, and it led to an invitation from the director of that center to write a book for his analytic series, which I didn't respond to 1 year, I didn't respond to the next year, and the third year he said to me again, why don't you write a book on Hinduism and animal ethics? And I said, well, I had a couple of reasons not to do it. And then he said, I really want you to write this because you are a practitioner. And when he said that, some little bell went off in my head that Krishna's calling you. This is a calling. This is what we're waiting for, is something like this opportunity. So, and then I thought, okay, Hinduism, yes, but what is of real particular interest and concern for many people who identify as Hindus, and for Vaishnavas, for Krishna devotees, is cows. And I had always felt a certain dissatisfaction with the, let's say, the extent and maybe the scope of knowledge within our ISKCON society regarding this subject. I felt there could be more research done. And furthermore, so I was thinking this could have a double value. It could have a value for ourselves in our society to get us thinking more about this challenge which our spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, gave us, that we should practice what in the Bhagavad Gita is called Go-Raksha, cow protection. There are farms and there are projects in different parts of the world where some small-scale, relatively small-scale efforts are going on. But I would say they're very small, and they're not at a stage of where we can point and say, this is a model which can be followed and which can be economically viable and which is demonstrating just what cow protection means long term. So I felt for us there could be some value in such research, and for a wider audience, in particular in a more quote-unquote academic sphere, it could also be of interest to generate interest, to possibly generate further research in this area. That's about as much as you can hope for in the academic world, that your research will lead to more research. And so I made it a point to do some sort of crowdfunding, fundraising, to make it possible to have the book published open access, because it comes at a price. And it was possible, and to my surprise, there were it was a quite quick process to do the fundraising. And because the company tracks, they have metrics on number of downloads of their open access books. So it's getting close to 3 years that the book is out and it's garnered 49,000 downloads according to their scale, which for academic book is not so bad. And then I reported this a year and a half ago to the editor of this book series, who is in Oxford. He's my friend. He's very nice. He is extremely dedicated to this subject. And he said, "Oh, this is amazing. You should write another book for the series." And so I've been gradually working up a concept of what I want that book to be. And one of the first things I decided about, because he keeps wanting Hinduism and animal ethics, but he's not completely fixed on that. And one thing I was sure about, I don't want the word Hindu in the title of my second book. Because I think it's not an attractive term for people in the West. It's just the way it is. But yoga, yoga is cool, right? A lot of people are doing yoga of one form or another. And it's all over the world, including China. And so that's my next project, is yoga and animal ethics. What do you think? Is that a good idea? So I just days ago, I finally, after quite some reflection and note-taking, and I managed to write a draft of one chapter. I submitted the formal proposal to the publisher, and their initial response is, "Looks good. We'll get back to you." So I'm waiting for that. It's an academic publisher, and what that means, one thing it means is everything you do goes for what they call peer review, including your book proposal. And that means that they request some scholar who has some knowledge in the area that you're writing in, and they get their opinion about what you're doing, what you're proposing. But actually, it was kind of funny with the cow care book. I got a peer review of the proposal, and it's anonymous. They sent to me the comments of the reviewer, and they were all very helpful comments. It wasn't just, trying to give me trouble. They were useful comments. And then it's, when you finish the book and submit the manuscript, then comes the second peer review. Now they look at the whole book, right? So I submitted the manuscript, and some days after that I got a message. The editor, the person who invited me to write the book, he had told the production manager, "No need for peer review of this. Whatever he writes is good." Okay, that was nice. So, as it is now, and this could change, but as it is now, my basic idea for this yoga and animal ethics is to say that if we really want to be consequential in changing how we as a species, as human beings, if we want to change what's happening, and everyone agrees now that the human so-called civilization is trashing the planet at breakneck speed. If we're going to do something about that, there's going to be need for very fundamental changes in our understanding of who we are. And that means the starting point is understanding the foundational principle of consciousness, and the process for that understanding has to be practice, has to be done. It's a practice. It's not just an idea or a philosophy. It's a practice. And the practice that in the broad term for this practice is yoga. The more specific term, which we like to emphasize, is bhakti. And we may want to even say bhakti is the more fundamental idea. But again, yoga is the sort of common denominator of what is known. It's become a somewhat household term. People know about yoga and have some idea that maybe it's not a bad thing, even if all they understand about yoga is that it's about doing various gymnastics, acrobatics, or whatever. So, to go about this, I thought the easiest, the most straightforward structure will be to take the classical Ashtanga yoga way of analyzing the process of yoga, the eightfold system, and just working through it step by step, with each of the angas making some connection with the issues at hand, having to do with how we relate with animals. And so I don't know how much detail to go into, but I can say one way I'm thinking about this is, as many of you will know, the first of the 8 angas or limbs of yoga is yama, which generally is translated as restraint, restraining oneself. And it's often identified as sort of the ethics of yoga in general, and it's recognized as a prerequisite for successful practice of yoga. And then this yama is broken down into 5 further categories, and the very first of these is ahimsa. And you could say, all right, that's all you have to say, and your job is done. You just talk about ahimsa and animal ethics, and you're good to go. But what I've come to appreciate is that, well, it's a little bit like in Bhakti Yoga. We understand ado shraddha tata sadhu sangota tato bhajana kriya. There's a step-by-step process beginning with ado, or in the beginning, shraddha, which means faith. And each step along the path is about reinforcing the faith. the Shraddha. So similarly, each step along the path of yoga in the broad generic sense is it is affirming and strengthening and deepening the notion of ahimsa. So ahimsa is going to be very much at the core of this. And again, the term ahimsa is widely known. Mahatma Gandhi popularized it in the early 20th century. And I will refer to him also because he was very concerned about animal care, not only ahimsa within the human society, but he saw it as integral to the ahimsa principle. Ahimsa, satya, truthfulness, or truth speaking, truth being. Asteya, non-stealing. Brahmacharya, that's a tough one for a lot of people. Aparigraha, non-possessiveness. These 5 principles, which are also there, and it's considered possibly to have been borrowed from these 5 principles from the Jain tradition. We don't talk much about Jainism in our Krishna temples. Jains. But actually there's some fascinating aspects of Jainism which I want to also bring into this book. I'm not restricting it to Vaishnavism only. There will be some discussion of Jain and also Buddhist ideas in appropriate places. So ahimsa, also very interesting. I found that the traditional commentators on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali really emphasize this ahimsa principle a lot, and they say there's no excuses. It's not just for yogis, it's for everyone. And it is foundational to all the other principles. So, like that. So I'm thinking of ahimsa as, sort of the rock ground basis. And a broader sense of ahimsa, I think, is respect. And respect then opens us up to thinking about what does it mean to relate with animals. Can we think of relating to animals with respect for the animals? Respect for the particular capacities of animals, for example. Lately I've kind of consciously, I've been making some effort to learn things about animals, animal behavior. It's fascinating. Oh, there's so many amazing things that animals do. There's a lot of violence also in the animal world, that has to be said. And that's something I need to think about how to talk about. There's the general theme which has become very widely discussed, is it's being recognized that a kind of fundamental problem of how we are trashing the environment is, philosophically speaking, Anthropocentrism. The idea that human beings are in the middle of the universe and our needs come first and everything revolves around us as human beings because we are the most advanced beings supposedly on the planet and so on. So to that, that idea is well taken on board by many who are concerned with these things. But what's missing from that discussion, to a large extent, is what's the alternative? Generally, the alternative given is, so we just have to see that we are also animals, and so let's be animals. Or some, it gets very vague at this point. So what I want to say is let's take the fifth item of the second limb of Ashtanga Yoga, which is Ishvara Pranidhana. Ishvara Pranidhana. What is Ishvara Pranidhana? It's a fancy way of saying bhakti. It's worship or service to Ishvara. And there's a lot of discussion among scholars what did Patanjali mean by that? How serious was he? What did he really mean? And even was he a covered Vaishnava? Maybe he was a Vaishnava, but he used the word Ishvara just to be more generic. So what I want to say is whatever it is, Ishvara means Lord, and so recognizing instead of anthropocentrism, then we can speak of Ishvara-centrism. And if we put Ishvara in the center, then everything falls into place. We fall into our right place. Animals, all living beings are understood and related to appropriately. And that's called ethics. Ethics is addressing the question, how should I act? How should we act? Well, then it goes on to asana and pranayama and pratyahara and dharana and dhyana and samadhi. And what am I going to say about animals in relation to all of these? Right? Well, you'd be surprised. There's a lot that can be said. And I just have a couple of notes here I might share. Asana, okay. Well, the first thing to say about asana is that many of the asanas, many of the postures, have the names of different animals. Right?
Yes.
Some examples?
Tortoise, kurmasana.
Kurmasana.
That's when you put your both legs behind your with your hands. Yeah. I will not demonstrate.
You will not demonstrate. Not this evening. It's too late in the day. Okay, so you can become a tortoise.
And just on this, and actually, when you are in that asana, you feel like a tortoise.
That's my point. That's my point, is that the asanas become meditations, something like, what would it be like to be a tortoise? There's a very famous article by one anthropologist, I think it was in the 70s maybe, he wrote. The title of the article was, "What is it like to be a bat?" You've heard of that? Thomas Nagel, yeah. So this is your area, right? He's raising questions. What is this thing, consciousness? What is it? What is quality? What is experience, and so on. But he raises the question in the context, or he frames it in terms of an animal's consciousness. I think that's very interesting. What is common in our consciousness with the consciousness of animals? Can we explore that to some depth? Of course, there's a lot of research about animal behavior. There has been an increasing recognition that animals really do have feelings, emotions, language. Certain whales have a language, the complexity of which has been shown to be at least that of human language, and so on. Animal postures of asanas is an interesting sort of opening. It's connected with, or it can be connected also with, shamanic traditions. Shamans are sort of practicing ways of identifying with certain animals. So that's a practice in some human societies. Can that be explored and expanded in relation to yoga? I read an account. There's a book by Vicky Hearn called "Naming the Animals." She writes. She's a horse trainer and a dog trainer, and she writes very deep, reflective ideas, thoughts about her experience with animals, and about the humans who misunderstand animals and who misunderstand humans who are relating with animals. But she mentions once one child, an autistic child, who was taken for horse, what do they call it? Therapy. Equine therapy. Equestrian therapy, yeah. And in one day he made incredibly dramatic change. He became quite normal after riding a horse for only 1 hour. But then after that, he went back to his parents, and his parents they felt threatened by this change in their child. So they said, no more of that. Yeah, imagine. The idea that God does asanas, I think, is also interesting. And I just a few days ago met Dhruva Prabhu at Singhachalam. He's the Nrsimha Bhakta, right? And as Carolina knows, he has discovered that there's a tradition that the real founder of yoga is Nrsimhadev. And you may have seen images of Nrsimha in what is called Yoga Nrsimha pose. It's Nrsimhadev with a kind of a rope around his knees. He's cross-legged, and according to one priest I met in South India, he's teaching Prahlad yoga. Prahlad is there and he's teaching him yoga. So initial steps, this rope is helping. Anyway, he's founder of yoga. I want to learn more about that. But also thinking about the asanas, the forms the deities take. Kurma asana. Kurma takes kurma asana. But also the vehicles of so many divinities are animals. Garuda is the vehicle of Lord Vishnu. What or who is the vehicle of Ganesh?
Mouse.
A mouse or rat, right? Elephant on a rat. Go figure. So anyway, there's a whole lot of associations that can be made that encourage, as I see it, especially in the Hindu tradition, to encourage us to think about relating with animals and relating animals with divinity. So if we have divinity in the center, Ishvara-centric instead of anthropocentric, then this makes it's like a Copernican revolution in our thinking about animals. You know about the Copernican revolution? Some people never heard of it. Oh, never heard of it. Oh dear. You want to explain the Copernican revolution?
We'll leave it for another day for the rest.
Okay. Anyway, that led me to another thought, which I just went out of my thoughts again. Then there's pranayama. Here's a quote from, I don't know if it's Luce or Luce Irigaray. She is a French philosopher, and she wrote a whole book. The book is called Between East and West, but her special focus in this book is on yoga and breathing. And she says, if the Buddha renounces, at least according to our perspective, it is because the objects of desire, the objective correlates of my subjective desires, that's a fancy way of saying sense objects, oppose harmony with, the objective correlates of my subjective desires oppose harmony with the universal breath. Okay, so the Buddha, she's into Buddhism, I guess. If he renounces sense gratification, we would say, why is it? Because he recognizes that it's opposed to the harmony with the universal breath. They, that is my subject desires, my desires thinking of subjectively, my desires, subjective desires, tear me to pieces, she says. The quest of the Buddha seems to me to correspond to the search for a continuous communion with the respiration of the macrocosm. He tries to become pure subject, but on a model forgotten by us. Pure subject means here breathing in tune with the breathing of the entire living universe. Because if death happens before this education of the breath, of the subject as breath, it means going back where all would start over again and worse. she's saying, if we don't get it, that we are connected with the rest of the universe, and we keep thinking we're special, you know, we don't have to care about what's happening around us, then it's going to be, we're going to have to start over. We're going to be, it's almost like she's saying we may be thrown into lower species of life and have to start over that way. I'm also in the pranayama section. I want to talk about time, because breathing is very much something we do as a kind of rhythm. And there's the rhythms of the universe, and there's the rhythms of different animals and their breathing. I was thinking about whales and their breathing. They breathe only when they come to the surface, and then they hold their breath, and how long they hold their breath while they go under. It's amazing. So like this we can develop, I think, a broad and still hopefully focused connection between yoga as a practice and animals as creations of the world to be respected. And I'm hoping to connect this with modern Western ethical thought. There's a kind of a new trend in modern Western ethical thought. We hear a lot about animal rights. I'm not so sure that's how helpful animal rights discourse is, but there's another sort of trend in ethics, and it's called the ethics of care. The ethics of care. And it kind of starts from a different starting point from the more analytical, traditional Western ethical thinking. It starts from the point of the unique situation of the natural situation of human beings caring for others, and expanding out from that to develop a wider vision. And the sort of core model of care in the ethics of care is the relation of the mother to the child. Most mothers, not all mothers, but most mothers have natural care and know how to care for their children. And they don't have to read, they do read a lot of books now, but generally you don't have to read how to take care of your kids. It's there, you know what to do. So I want to try to draw ideas from the yoga tradition together with the ideas of this ethics of care tradition. This means also, of course, it means discussing the idea of dharma. I have one chapter in this book which is not so much focused on cows as such, but it's more of a theoretical chapter, and I introduce some of these ideas. I'll finish in a minute. I'll just say that the last three limbs of yoga in the classical eightfold system are dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. And dharana usually is translated as, concentration, dhyana as meditation, and samadhi as absorption. Here I'm playing with the idea to do a bit of what would be called constructive theology, a little bit, being a bit creative, to make a parallel between concentration and karma yoga. And then to discuss in that chapter about engagement of animals in work. I think because it's an issue, engaging animals, the sort of hardcore vegan people say, no, you can't engage animals, that's slavery. What's the difference between putting two oxen into a yoke and making them plow a field? What's the difference between that and slavery? Well, is it slavery? So I want to discuss that. And I'm hearing from devotees who train oxen to pull a plow or a cart, and they say they love it. They're looking forward to getting the yoke on. Let's get to work. Then dhyana, meditation. Of course, there's dhyana yoga, but I want to sort of connect it with jnana, and in this way focus on the idea of understanding the common ontological commonality between ourselves and animals. Basically, as Krishna is saying in the Bhagavad Gita, Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane Gavihasti Shuni Chaiva Svapake Cha Pandita Samadarshina. The Pandit is a Samadarshi, is one who sees equally. What does he see? He sees a learned priest and an elephant and a dog, and Shvapacha, which literally means dog cooker. He sees all different beings sama, with equality. Why? How is that? Because there's a recognition of spirit, of the common denominator of all beings, of spiritual consciousness. Yeah, and then samadhi, that's for bhakti yoga. That's when we can sort of pull out the stops, talk about Krishna and his cows, and like that. So that's a little sketch of what this is. Still in rather early stage, and with your blessings, I may be able to do it, and one day have another book here to show you. Hare Krishna. Questions or comments? Just a brief sketch. Yes. Thank
you very much for this very interesting presentation on the future book. I had two questions. One is, you mentioned how you would deal with this aspect of Ishvara Pranita, or
Ishvara Pranidhana.
Pranidhana, okay.
Yeah.
And so I was just thinking, therein, do you intend to speak about also the aspect of them also having souls, in a way that if we try to make the approach God-centered, at some junction will you be speaking about having a soul? And that animals also have soul? If yes, because you already mentioned how the animal rights may not be a helpful approach, but then it is quite widespread.
Yeah.
So, and also the recognition of animals as persons. So is this something you would be addressing also in the book?
Yes, I want to talk about what is person, what does it mean, what is a person. I was at a conference some years ago. It was the International Conference on Persons. These are philosophers, very nice people. It was a conference in Sweden, and it was an opportunity to present Vaishnava personalism. There's actually a European philosophical tradition of personalism which goes back to the 18th century, turns out. A small, not very widely known tradition. So, and one of the sort of main presentations was by one Spanish scholar who gave a very elaborate, sort of quite systematic analysis of his understanding of what is person. I couldn't follow it very well. His accent was a bit strong. But what I remember from the presentation was, after his presentation, in the questions session, one person asked him, so then can a whale be a person? And his one-word answer was no. And I kind of went, oh. Okay. You've got this elaborate philosophy of what is a person, and then can a whale be a person? No. No further discussion. He sort of, that was it. No. Yes, personhood. I was in fact considering giving a title of this book something like Yoga, Animals, Persons. But we'll see when the time comes. Now, working title is just Yoga and Animal Ethics. Of course, it's a whole ocean of writing that's been done. What is personhood? And I'm not sure how far I want to go into that. I have some material, and certainly I will address it. And you're right, animal rights is an important idea. The rights of nature is very important, and it could be that this is an important avenue. I haven't really wrestled with it enough yet, but we'll see. One point, though, that was made by a couple of scholars I was reading as I was preparing this book is they were saying, there's been a lot of writing about and a lot of speaking about animal rights, but what's the result? What do we see in the world in terms of actual benefit? Very little, very, very little. And one documentary I was just looking at, they were saying Ecuador has now written into their constitution the rights of nature, and this is a wonderful thing. But then in the same film later they say, but the application of it, the implementation is very minimal, and there's still so much destruction going on. There seems like increasing destruction going on in that country. So it's one thing having this understanding; it's another applying it. And I think what I want to say with this book is, it's all right to have laws, to have rules. That's necessary in human society. But these need to be reflective of a deeper reality, a deeper realization. And that is what yoga is about. It's about people becoming transformed through a process, through a practice.
Thanks so much. Just on the point what you just asked about personhood, I was wondering also in connection with pranayama and the breathing and then Atman, right? Because once in an Indology introduction course at university, I asked the teacher about this word Atman, if it's connected to atomos and linguistically, and then she said no, actually it's rather connected to Atem in German. So I was just wondering if you have kind of more background to that, or what is the newest kind of
What's the latest?
theory? Yeah, because they're always changing this thing.
What I was always told, what I always understood is the word Atman is originally simply the reflexive, like we say, myself, I myself. So Atman, as a Sanskrit term, initially had this sense of I myself, or his self, or themselves, expressing that idea. And then it develops into, they say, more a philosophical concept. And Prabhupada speaks about how Atman can mean the spirit soul, but it can also mean body, it can also mean mind, depending on the context. And so there's some, like much of Sanskrit language, there's a lot of ambiguity. But with regarding prana and pranayama, this is something I want to try to learn something more about, because sometimes it's being said, and I don't know if this is in the classical tradition or if it's more later, sort of trendy yoga, but there's this idea of prana being an interface between matter and spirit, and I find that interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because when you breathe in, because they say when you breathe in, and then you breathe in like fresh air, cold air, or oxygen, and then when you breathe out, it comes out warm. And then in that particular moment, there is the exchange of particles, right? And it's like a small explosion. How we do it without being aware of it. But that is a special moment. If we could meditate on it, it's talking about them.
Did you know that when you breathe, you are exploding?
That's the small particles, right?
Yeah, so... Yes.
Thank you, Maharaj, for a very interesting class. I appreciate your point there about personhood. And I would like to just give a little anecdote that showed the point that some vegan, they preach about animal rights, but they don't understand that they are persons.
Yeah.
So how weird it can go. It was my Shiksha Guru Tapas Prabhu. He was in a forum on the internet for vegans, and he started to ask and challenge a little bit, because they were so against drinking the milk, and they're saying like only babies should drink milk, and humans should not, adult humans should not drink milk of cows, and it's abuse and all that. So he started to ask them, so if we stop drinking milk, what will happen to the cow? They will die out. And I say, yeah, then it's fine. The cow will die out. That's not our problem. So obviously, I'm thinking now, listening to you, that they don't know that the cow is a person. They just So I think also from Srila Prabhupada's books, it's so easy to understand what is a person, somebody who can exchange. So even animals can be dependent on humans and humans on animals. It's not so hard to understand, but somehow.
Yes, one lady, scholar, I think she's in England. She is vegan. She's very much kind of a missionary for veganism, and she's a scholar. And she did some research and wrote an article. She did a survey of vegans, and she had statistics, but I don't remember the numbers, but the majority of vegans are atheists. They proclaim themselves atheists. What does that mean? And where is their... I find it curious because they're very strongly saying, it's not ethical, so that they have some sort of ethical consciousness. But another point, and thank you for making this point about not recognizing persons, but the other thing is they don't think through how are you going to get your loaf of bread. This is demonstrated very graphically in a small film that was made by devotees in New Vrindavan years ago. A devotee takes a loaf of bread and he holds it up and he says, how are you going to get your loaf of bread? You're going to get it from the wheat that grows on this field. And he points to a field, fairly large plot of land. He says, it will take this amount of land to make this one loaf of bread. So how are you going to prepare your field to grow the grain for your loaf of bread? Oh, you're going to use a tractor, are you? And so then you're depending on petrol, yes? And then, no, we won't. Oh, okay, so then you're going to plow yourself, because you're not using animals, right? Here, and he takes a shovel, and he holds out a shovel and a pick, and he says, good luck preparing this field. So if you're not engaging animals to in the whole process of agriculture, then you will be using fossil fuels. And if you're using fossil fuels, the question becomes, for how long can you do that? Because they say it's been peak oil since some years now, which means the cost of extracting the oil rapidly becomes more expensive than the value of that oil that's being extracted. There's a diminishing return. So there are a lot of things about the vegan movement that I think we can address with something like this. And there's something good about the movement. They are concerned. That's good. And they want to stop the totally mad slaughter of animals. That's certainly good. But they don't really seem to have the full picture.
From where comes the like they presuppose that it has to be abusive when animals and humans cooperate. It's strange.
Yeah.
It's not care. It's not the concept of care.
The concept of care is not there. They're basically saying that if we engage with animals, it must be exploitative. But that's because they are exploitative. themselves, because they can't imagine another way of being. And that other way of being, what I want to argue, is possible to develop by a process, and that is what we call yoga. Yeah. Nanda Kumar.
When you mentioned that there is this major idea that the humans are the most evolved, there was this word
Anthropocentrism.
yes, and then going from there to Ishvara Pranidhan seems like a big
It's a big leap.
big leap, and I was thinking, what could be in between? And you, and I thought about, you mentioned this care, like, and if we are so advanced, what it means to be advanced, and even in human society, we could maybe evaluate that the people who are capable of more care of others and acknowledging and awareness of others could be considered more evolved in terms of consciousness. And that could be like a gateway to, okay, you are most advanced, well then take the responsibility of being most advanced and care to,
That's nice, thank you. That idea is also coming up in, well, I mentioned the editor of the series. He's a Christian minister himself, a vicar in the Anglican Church, and so his own writing about animal ethics is it's all very much in the Christian tradition, and they make that same point really, that all beings are creatures of God, and it is when it says if we want to take the biblical statement from Genesis that humans have dominion, then what is dominion? It doesn't mean exploitation, it means caring for all beings. Yeah. Go ahead.
I just have one small question. Because it appears you will be using classical texts like Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, and I was thinking about this aspect that the same texts also talk about the lower births being that of the animals, and also violence against. I mean, there are aspects where people could interpret it as violence on animals also. So if you're using the same text, how do you deal with that aspect?
Okay, well, one point is there's an ongoing issue, we could say, that a long time issue, which is very much expressed in Bhagavatam, with animal sacrifice. The whole story of Narada speaking to King Prachinabarhishat, the sort of essential point of the whole story is stop this so-called animal sacrifice you're doing, because it's you're going to suffer from it. All those animals are going to come and attack you. I'm thinking in the chapter on karma yoga to talk about this. Karma And essentially, as Prabhupada says, this is not the age for animal sacrifice. So if you're confident that you can offer an animal in sacrifice such that it will in fact be elevated and not come back and swallow you, then go ahead. Do the animal sacrifice, because by that you will eventually understand it's really not a good idea. As essentially is what Manu is saying in his Manava Dharma Shastra, Manu Samhita. So yes, the violence is there, and the idea of absolute nonviolence, the closest that seems to come to an absolute nonviolence is the Jain idea, specifically of what they call salekana. Salekana is voluntary giving up all eating and drinking to death. With their logic, which is not our logic, but there's a certain logic to it, is that all karma is a result of violence. Violence is fundamentally perpetuated in our practice of eating. So we'll stop eating, and in this way we can shed all karma and become liberated. That sounds good, but except that Krishna says, "Nahi kaschit kshanamapi jatu tishtatya karma krit." You cannot stop acting even for a moment. Also in the Bhagavatam it says, what is it? Palguni tatra mahatam jiva jivasya jivanam. Life is the life of life. The bigger is eating the smaller, and so on. That's recognized. Now the question comes, where do we fit into that as human beings? The distinction we understand that we have from animals is that we practice dharma. And Bhishma says the highest dharma is ahimsa. Prabhupada says it's not the highest dharma. He says it's the natural way of acting of a Vaishnava. A Vaishnava will be naturally non-violent or minimally violent. But we practice dharma, which means, we minimize. And we go a step further. Dharma is not enough. Bhakti is the natural conclusion. Savai hum samparo dharma. The paradharma is bhakti, which is offered to Adhokshaja. And so, what do we do when we do bhakti? Well, patram pushpam palam toyam yome bhakta prayachati tadaham bhakti paritam ashnami prayata atmana. Ashnami, I eat, I consume, Krishna says. I consume what you offer if you offer it with devotion. So that's what we're doing. We're trying to offer with devotion whenever we eat, before we eat. Yeah. Does that get at your small question? Good. Yes.
So half of the vote is, if we don't have farms and we need to offer milk, the milk, so
Yes, that's subject.
Black hole, watch out.
Watch out. Yeah, that's an ongoing discussion. And I think the first question a helpful question to reflect on is it really the milk that you buy in the shop, which has been produced in a large dairy, which is an extension of the meat and therefore slaughter industry. Is it milk? That's the first question. Is it milk? Is it being accepted by Krishna? Now comes always the point, oh, but Srila Prabhupada was, never saying that we shouldn't offer this milk and so on. Hare Krishna, thank you for coming. Good night. And I would just say, well, that's certainly the case. Prabhupada did many things as expedient of the time. And I wonder if he wouldn't want us to be working more toward doing the needful in having protected cows. And so, yeah, that's what some of us we're discussing and we're trying to make happen more, as it's been also requested by our GBC to at least get the milk that we're offering to the deities to be coming from our own cows. Then we can be sure that it's milk, and we can be reasonably sure Krishna is accepting it. Yeah. So, on that happy note, what's tomorrow? We're having a session on what? Questions and answers.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Marsh. Tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock we again gather here in the temple room, and we have a simple Q&A, question and answer session.
We call it Stump the Swami.
Bring all your difficult questions.
See how quickly you can embarrass the Swami.
Of course, there's the understanding of asking in a submissive, humble way. Also, there is a certain culture, but the idea is the idea of Sadhu Sangha, that we get the chance to associate with Maharaj and bring our questions. Maharaj being a practitioner of Bhakti Yoga for over 50 years, with so much experience and realizations, I'm sure we get a lot of benefit by asking our questions and receiving the answers. So please do come tomorrow, 7 o'clock, here in the temple. Hare Krishna.
Come with your questions. However controversial.
And ask them in a respectful way.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Anthropocentrism ki jai, Lord Krishna.
Hari Hari Bol. So nice Krishna Kshetra Maharaj ki jai.
also cover topics of if you choose the BI and the purpose within mind is to understand but also
pretty much clear, right?
But villager, you can use that
that's the religious course.
Religious to get some.
It's like a scholarly course. There's one teacher, some teachers.
very nice.
I don't know, I think you don't know what it's called. It's first of all technical,
I've been very good at we've been all the way through, midway through for 7 hours. I think it's a very, very good.
I wish I could, I hope someday.
So yeah, I keep me going.
Is it known by him?
He's working with us is pulling it into shape. I think every time we get through this, he's already written so much intro. It's 20 minutes to do each.
Well, it may be restricted, and that's why. It's probably
I mean, the Ishvara Pranayama comes up, Ishvara pops up again and again. Actually, none of the Niyamas are in the Bhagavad Gita.
yeah, they're all very close.
Well, there's a verse which has got 9 of them, and it's in
12.
Yeah?
12 yamas. Or at least 10. No, but I thought it's good to kind of mainly focus on those interests. That's what's and I'll make references. And of course, when it comes to samadhi as bhakti, then bring it all out.
No, I think we have to think about that.
The constructive theology.
Would it not be that, those yogas stand on their own, but in the combination of each of the yogas, karma, you could look at it as, confrontation, meditation, and perfection. There is a kind of hierarchy within karma yoga and within jnana yoga, and even within bhakti. And if you roll it like that,
Oh, I see.
so with each of them, rather than have kind of correlation,
Yeah, it's too artificial.
because tantric system, in one sense, is what we do. It applies to everything we do in the full system. If you want to be a sportsman, you probably apply all the So I kind of think we could treat them like that. It's a system for doing different types of things such as yoga.
So in effect, if you're doing karma yoga, you can do it on the level of dharana, and then the level of jnana, and then on the level of samadhi.
It can be, you can do it really almost theoretical, certain practical, because we absorb. I think that would seem more natural, the way of looking at each of those, because each worth bringing in, because they each speak to how we might behave and think towards.
What about certain both? In other words, to say one way of looking at karma is just the area and another way is to see it as a stage in No, but I think you're right.
If you need